email to check that out. And otherwise, you can always go over to our YouTube channel where we're also streaming and watch it again at your convenience. Second item is that we will be using the Zoom chat and Q&A for audience questions. So drop your questions in there and we will try and answer them after the presentation. And then finally, keep an eye out in the chat as well for a coupon code for a 1-month trial of our RAMP software. So with that covered, we can start recording and I will jump right in. We're going to talk all about assistive technology today. All right, there we go. So yeah, again, today we're going to talk about assistive technology. The first slide up we have here is just going to be related but distinct sections. The first is just going to be the basics. What is assistive technology and who uses it? Next up, we are going to look at the intersection and interdependence of assistive technology and digital accessibility standards, also known as WCAG. And then last up, we're going to wrap with what it's like to use assistive technology in the wilds of the digital space. All right, so on to slide number 2 here. We have the screen share going?
We do now. Yep, we're good.
Okay. Yep, it sounds like it. Excellent. So we are on slide 2 for anyone who is following along here. And we're going to talk about what is assistive tech. And so first of all, assistive technology in the digital space includes software and hardware that enables people with disabilities to use digital content. I will say there's also myriad assistive technologies in the physical space as well, but we're going to really lean into the digital space for the purpose of our discussion today. So these assistive technologies allow users with disabilities to do things like navigate, read, and interact with websites, mobile apps, and electronic documents. Most assistive technology tools are quite robust and highly customizable, and this ensures that users can really dial in their settings to meet their individual needs and preferences. Assistive technology is not a substitute or a replacement for accessible design and code. Assistive technology alone also cannot solve for accessibility. So even though we're starting to see the implementation of some AI features and things in assistive technologies that can help folks troubleshoot inaccessible situations, that should never be considered the preferred or default option. All right, next up, let's look at some common types of assistive tech and who we might find using them. So first up, we have screen readers. This is one we've probably all heard a bit about. And screen readers communicate visual information on a screen via spoken audio or refreshable electronic braille. And these types of technology are typically used by people without vision or with limited vision. Next up, we have screen magnification and contrast enhancement tools. And so these types of tools are typically used by folks with limited vision, and they allow users to resize content on a screen to make it easier for them to see, as well as manage things like color themes and contrast, and increasing visibility of things like blinking text cursors and mouse pointers. Next up, we have captioning software, transcripts, and visual indicators. These types of tech are typically used by people without hearing or with limited hearing. And an example here might be if you have an instructional video on how to use your product, you're conveying any audio in that video via captions so that someone who can't hear them is now able to read them or to read them through electronic braille as well. Next up, we have things like alternate input devices. So that can be voice control, switch controls, things like that. These are typically used by folks with limited manipulation or limited reach and strength. Next up, we have text-to-speech, text highlighting, and read aloud tools. And so these tools are going to be typically used by people with cognitive, learning, or processing differences. And an example here might be using read aloud to highlight a dense block of text so that a user can read and listen at the same time, as well as having the highlight to help them know where to focus on the screen. All right, I'm going to take a quick sip of water and we'll move into the middle section. The webinar where we're going to talk a little bit about the intersection and some of those assistive technologies that we just went through and our digital accessibility standards. So it's a very brief WCAG review. When we say digital accessibility standards, that's what we're referring to, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It is the internationally recognized standard for digital accessibility. WCAG is now widely referenced in various global laws related to digital accessibility, such as the Americans with Disabilities Act, Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and the European Accessibility Act. WCAG defines how digital content should be designed and built to support accessibility. In fact, many of the WCAG success criteria are in service of assistive technology. One of the goals of WCAG is to ensure that functionality and information are in place so that assistive technology can work correctly. And finally, WCAG is organized around 4 core principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And hang on to those because we're going to revisit that here in a minute with some real life examples of how we can bring the accessibility standards and assistive tech together. All right, so let's for a minute look at how users with disabilities experience assistive tech and WCAG. And so the first thing to note is that users don't experience these two things in isolation from one another, okay? Users experience whether a task is impossible, frustrating, or seamless. Where their experience lands on that spectrum between impossible and seamless depends entirely on accessible design, code, and assistive technologies all being in place and working together. By implementing WCAG standards, we provide accessible structure, which provides meaningful and predictable behavior so that then assistive technologies are able to communicate that meaning to users. When any part or step in this process is broken, that's when we experience access barriers, and we find ourselves back on that kind of impossible to frustrating end of the spectrum instead of the seamless and smooth, which is where most users would like to be. All right, next up here, we're going to talk about, I mentioned we're going to be coming back to that POUR principle, P-O-U-R. We're going to look at a few examples of how this relates specifically to assistive technology. So the first one up we have is perceivable. And in essence, this means that users need to be able to detect the content is present on a screen through one or more of their senses. And an assistive technology example would be a screen reader communicates content through speech or refreshable electronic braille for users without vision. So I can't see with my eyes anything meaningful on the screen, so I'm not using my sense of sight, but I can, in fact, hear it if it's read out to me or read it tactily with refreshable braille. So we're using the assistive technology alongside the standards to make sure that users can perceive that content is present. Next up, we have operable. This means that users can navigate and interact with content using their preferred input method. So an assistive technology example here might be that a user with limited manipulation uses switch control to move through and activate elements on a page. Right, so someone maybe is not using a conventional keyboard or a mouse pointing device, but because WCAG is in place, the content is keyboard navigable, and then they are able to use their switch control or alternate input device to in turn reach all areas of the content. All right, part 2 of this section is on the next slide, and the next concept here or principle is understandable. So this means that content is clear, predictable, and behaves in expected ways. An assistive technology example here, the screen reader user encounters an error submitting a form online, and the error messages describe the cause in ways that are easily interpreted by the assistive technology and can be clearly communicated to the user so that they can correct the error and complete the task. And our fourth principle is robust. And this is kind of where everything comes together. So this means that content works reliably across a range of user agents, such as browsers, devices, and assistive technologies. An assistive technology example of this principle, a screen magnification user can resize content and interact with it successfully on a variety of devices, so a smartphone, a tablet, or a desktop computer. All right. The next section, we're moving on to the third and final section here. I am going to take another quick drink of water. This is where we get to talk a little bit about some experiences of assistive technology users in the sort of everyday course of being in the digital space. So the first thing to draw attention to here is that the learning curve with some of these assistive technologies can be pretty steep. So we mentioned earlier that they can be quite robust and highly customizable, which is awesome. And the flip side of that is it can mean learning hundreds of proprietary keyboard commands and shortcuts and alternate ways of interacting with things. So the cognitive load here can be fairly high to get up to speed with some of these technologies. Training and education are often hard to come by when it comes to using these. These are fairly highly specialized types of technology, and the folks who are able to teach that can be hard to come by. We in the United States actually have a critical shortage at this point of vision rehabilitation therapists and teachers of the visually impaired. And those are often the folks to whom it falls to teach people who are blind or visually impaired how to use screen readers and magnification. Another reality here is that cost can be a big barrier. We are seeing more often now the inclusion of some assistive technologies like Apple VoiceOver being native to our devices. And that is certainly helping. But again, depending on the environment you're working in, the type of tech you need to use, cost can still be a pretty serious barrier. And I know that sometimes there's a misconception that these types of items can be considered durable medical equipment. But here in the United States anyways, health insurance is not under any circumstance paying for these assistive technologies. Next thing to know is that often one type of assistive tech is not enough to meet a user's needs across things like school, employment, recreation, and all sorts of different areas where we find ourselves in the digital space. And this happens in a couple of ways. So first of all, I mentioned those sort of categories of folks who might be using assistive tech. People can have intersectional disabilities, multiple disabilities with intersectional needs, meaning that they need to use more than one type of assistive tech. So maybe they use a screen reader and a switch control. And the second way that this can happen, and that it's not a one and done, is that I'll use myself for an example. I'm a screen reader user, and I have had to learn two different screen readers on my Windows laptop, as well as I use iPhone and iPad. That's another screen reader, all with customized gestures and inputs and ways that it interacts with content. So it's just important to know that there might be a lot of variables at play for some users of assistive technology. Next up, these two kind of go together. I'm going to say them in the reverse order than they're on the slide, but so assistive technology users can be at very different skill and familiarity levels with their assistive technology. So again, I'll just use myself as an example. I am someone who grew up using assistive tech, learning with it, evolving with it, experimenting with it, keeping up with all the changes and progress. And so I'm clearly going to be at a very different place than someone who's also my age, but perhaps newer to vision loss. And this has been thrust upon them as a new skill set that they need to acquire just to be able to resume some things that were probably quite simple before. So people can be at very different levels, and sort of to that end, you shouldn't have to be like a high level power user with your assistive tech just to compensate for inaccessible content. Sometimes, in fact, you can't compensate for inaccessible content by doing that. And the reality is that whether I have decades of experience and the person next to me has a few months of experience, with the correct implementation of WCAG alongside access to the right assistive tech, we should basically be having the same great experience interacting with your content. All right, and next to last, I mentioned that these technologies can be pretty customizable, and a lot of us really have our settings dialed in to our exact use case, preference, and needs. And it can be super frustrating when we encounter things like an accessibility toolbar or an overlay widget or similar, just to access a specific website or app. We know what works best for us, and we already have that dialed in, and don't want to have to kind of jump through the extra hoops of interacting with those additional pieces of software just to be able to access the content. So implement WCAG, do it the right way. We'll roll up with our assistive tech. We don't need any extra layers. In fact, the most recent Web AIM survey in Accessibility in Mind survey in 2024 had a statistic that said up to 71% of users with disabilities will categorically just leave a site if they encounter an overlay or an accessibility widget. So yeah, so there's that. And I know I've spent a few minutes here talking about things that can be challenging and whatnot, but I really want to close by saying that when in fact we do have proper implementation of WCAG, access to and training with assistive technologies, like opportunities expand significantly. That's really when doors open and possibility can be realized, in particular for users with disabilities. And so now that we know a little bit more about assistive tech, what it is, who uses it, and how it relates directly, and in fact is interdependent on proper implementation of digital accessibility standards, I can only recommend that it's really important if you want to make sure that your users are having a great experience, even though you've done all the work, met all the success criteria, done all the remediations. We really want to be engaging with your stakeholders with disabilities throughout the process to make sure that they are in fact having the intended good experience by doing all the hard work of implementing WCAG. So keep that in mind, and I will hand it over, Gianna, to you if you want to just cover our How Accessible Web Can Help slide.
Yeah. So we offer a full comprehensive range of accessibility tools and services here at Accessible Web, as you probably know if you join us for these webinars regularly. So we certainly recommend, if you're just dipping your toes into accessibility, checking out RAMP, which is a great starting point for assessing your website or digital assets for conformance. But we also offer UX testing and manual services like audits that'll help you dive deeper into that to ensure full WCAG conformance. And I know we're definitely going to talk a little bit more about involving users with disabilities, because we've got a first question here that links up to this topic. So
Awesome.
I'll jump right into it. At what stage should teams involve users who rely on assistive technologies? Generally, our recommendation from our experience, so I'll start by saying at all stages of the process, it is a good idea to involve the voice of people with disabilities in. If you're talking specifically about UX testing sessions with people with disabilities, we've found that the most value kind of comes after initial remediations. So typically we advise like our clients who are working with us for audits on to slot UX testing in after they've done the initial audit and have started working on remediations or have remediated many of the major like blocker issues so that they can get some more valuable feedback from the UX testing session that is not just a user being fully unable to operate the site. But I'd love to get your thoughts on this too, Heather, because I'm sure you have some advice on, as to where UX testing and assistive technology feedback can slide into the process.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would echo both of things that you brought up, which was, and there may be two different things here. So, it parallels what we say related to when should we think about digital accessibility in the process, and the answer is early and often. And you could apply that as well to engaging with users with disabilities. You might not be doing like hands-on user testing, but you're engaging so that you're learning and it's informing your teams on what are the expected behaviors? How do people who use switch control interact? How do people who use screen readers interact? What makes things easier for them? What makes things harder for them? And so that's kind of one thing. And then I would echo what Gianna said in terms of doing the user testing after the initial audit and remediation, because at that point, you're getting very refined information from the users. So in fact, I might be testing out something for you, and I might be able to say, well, yes, technically I can get there, and this could improve the overall user experience, right? And so I think that's a great time. But really, to do the actual like hands-on testing, if you want to do specific like workflows on your website or whatever, I think that's a great time. And it perhaps is a bit of a separate issue, but also to say, in educate yourselves, inform yourselves, engage with users early on, even if it's design and development, to just inform the process and save yourself from making a lot of extra remediations towards the end, right? The more you know about this early on, the more successful it's going to be in the long run. And you're going to have a great user experience for everybody.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that, Heather. That was a fantastic answer there. All right. How to balance between inclusive design with tight timelines and a limited budget. This is always a challenge. I would say keep accessibility in mind at all stages of the process as much as you can, and just try to do what you can when you can, as you are changing or updating your digital properties there. Do you have any other thoughts there too, Heather?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just say this is one of those times where we do talk about progress over perfection.
Hmm.
And every step you take, even if it feels small and it feels like things are moving at a glacial pace, is improving the user experience for your users with disabilities. So um, definitely pace yourself. It's okay to not do it all at once. And the other kind of side of that coin is if you find yourself in that position, again, um, educate yourself on how to provide accommodations. So if you know you're working on say your e-commerce site and you know it's not great, if I'm trying to purchase a product and I can't do that, have a mechanism for me as a user to reach out and say, hey, I encountered this barrier, and be prepared to say, yep, we're working on that. And how can we meet that need in the meantime? How can we help you complete that process somewhere else? So be prepared to offer an accommodation in the meantime, and know that every even small step you take is moving you in the right direction and is improving the user experience.
Yes. Yep, that is generally our advice there. And we run into this quite frequently.
Yeah.
And so yeah, just take steps in the right direction and do what you can as you can do throughout the life cycle of the project and or website. Let's see. Okay, how can organizations balance innovation and updates with stability for users who rely on consistent patterns? Ooh, that's an interesting question. Hmm. I would refer back to kind of universal design and the kind of overarching benefits of maintaining at least some level of, consistency in terms of how it relates to how users will be interacting with the product. Um, Generally, in my mind, that's not in opposition to innovation and updates. Usually, if you're innovating and updating, you're doing so in a way that will hopefully make it more usable for a broader set of users anyway, and can typically be aligned with principles of universal design and accessibility standards.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, maybe don't change everything all at once. Give people a chance
Yeah.
to sort of adapt and learn. And if you are, making major changes at some point, even providing like some support documentation or videos, like, hey, we
Mm.
know this is how you're used to interacting with it. This is what's going to be different. So maybe just providing a little bit of additional support in that way as well. But I would agree with Gianna too that they're not necessarily in conflict with one another if you deeply understand universal design and digital accessibility. I don't think this doesn't need to be um, it can be, what's the word I want? I can't think of the word, but
Complementary.
you can do both. You can do
Yeah,
both. It does not have to be one or the other.
I agree. Yeah. Um, And then we have this is I know a topic that we talk about sometimes, Heather. So, do some digital spaces expect that one type of assistive technology is enough when testing or auditing? Um, yes, we see this misconception frequently, especially when people are kind of new to the space of assistive technology. And usually it's screen readers that people have in
Yeah.
mind as like the one assistive technology that they are trying to build in compatibility for. And it's certainly a misconception that we try to counter when we come across it, because it's not the case. And Heather can certainly speak more to this, I know.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that comes to mind immediately for me too is that if you start solving for accessibility kind of in isolation like that for one type
Mm.
of assistive tech, you could actually be introducing issues for other users. And so admittedly, screen readers get a lot of airtime. There are a lot of us talking about them, and it can be complex to learn and
Mm.
understand, how they work. So I think that's why they get a lot of airtime, but they certainly are not the only assistive tech. And if you are testing using a representative sample of different types of assistive technology, as well as, like I mentioned, users at different levels of skill and familiarity with their technology.
Yeah, excellent advice there. Um, and then we have another good question here, which is curious to understand how reliable are automated accessibility tools compared to manual testing with assistive technology. So this is something I talk about quite a lot from the sales side of things, because here at Accessible Web, we obviously have a platform ramp that includes an automated scanning tool. We've also built in a guided manual audit tool in ramp too. And the reason we did that is because I would say that while automated scanning tools are reliable in that they will yield, if they're built on a well-established and respected automated accessibility scanning rule set, then they're reliable, but they are not comprehensive. In that automated tools alone, and this goes for any tool in the market that I am aware of currently, and it's actually kind of reflected in the language of the WCAG guidelines there, cannot give you the full picture of WCAG conformance. We estimate 30-ish% of accessibility issues can probably be caught with these automated scanning tools. Potentially a little bit more depending on the nature of your content, certainly less in some situations where there's higher user interaction. So the answer is that you always want to, if you are striving for full conformance, the goal is to always pair automated tools with manual auditing or manual assessment and or assistive technology testing. Ideally, all three of these. Automated tools are a great way to build efficiency into the process, do things, knock out those low-hanging errors that can be identified with those tools. But then you will need manual review to verify full conformance. And ideally, you'll also layer in that assistive technology testing so that you're getting that lived experience and an additional layer of feedback to verify that you're offering as seamless an experience as possible for all users there.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. We did actually have a webinar on a topic related to this, which was how and when to use assistive technology spot checking
Mhm.
in your remediation process. And this would there would be another sort of good opportunity to bring that up, which is you can do some of that, and there certainly are times and places where it's appropriate to do that, with the large caveat that it's not any kind of a substitute for the experience that like a native assistive technology user would have. But you can certainly incorporate some assistive technology spot checking into your process, and that will give you additional
Yeah.
um, insight, whether you're doing automated scanning or
Yeah.
full manual WCAG audit.
hmm Automated scanning. I love automated scanning, especially for after you've completed that audit and you've done that full, really in-depth assessment, because then you can be, and the remediations as well, because then you can be confident that you have essentially an accessible foundation. And at that point, those automated scanners tend to do that. A lot of the low-hanging fruit issues are in the content level stuff, like things that might be added in images or blog posts. And they're a great tool for catching those on an ongoing basis. And that helps keep accessibility on top of mind because this is an ongoing process. It's not just a one-time project. It should be something that you're thinking about on an ongoing basis and maintaining with the full website. It's a critical part of your infrastructure. All right. So we are out of questions. We have a fantastic comment here in the chat. So building with accessibility in mind from the ground up versus having to backtrack or redo it later seems comparable cost and effort wise to building a house well for the first time versus building and then having to remodel it later on. This is a conversation. Yes, we fully agree. This is so spot on, and this is
Lots
a
of head
conversation we
nodding,
have with our
everyone.
clients all the time. One of our goals is to often when people come to us, obviously with established products that need assessment and remediation, but our goal is to help them shift left, integrate great accessibility earlier in the design and development process so that they are building accessibly from the ground up and they are not having to go back and do repairs and remediation on their website, which is definitely more costly and more time intensive than doing it right the first time.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's
Yes, that
makes
was
a
that
lot
was
of
great.
sense. Mhm.
All right. So we are at time today. Thank you so much, Heather. This is a fantastic presentation. As everyone knows, we are here on every Thursday at 2 o'clock. So please keep an eye out for next week's webinar. They're all listed on our website as well. So you're welcome to go in there and sign up ahead of time. We would love to see you again next week. And please bring any questions you might have, whether they're related to the topic or accessibility more broadly. Thank you again, everyone.
Thanks,
Say
Gianna. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
bye.